Yes, Ms. Scott.
Checking I've unmuted myself, I have. Can I begin by making a correction, please, to the transcript? It's been brought to my attention that I misspoke something. So I was on document DHSC 0032165_115. I was reading out a bit about cost of testing, ALT testing, and apparently I said it was £25,000 per annum, and in fact it's £250,000 per annum. So can I just make that correction? Thank you.
Well, that will be picked up in due course. Thank you.
Can I then, Dr. Wagstaff, ask you some questions about the production of cryoprecipitate? Excuse me. We've heard from other witnesses that had they been asked to increase their production of cryoprecipitate, they would have been able to do so, and some have said within a matter of weeks. You have given some evidence about this in your witness statement, and you've said in your witness statement, and we don't need to go to it, but it's paragraph 192, that if you had been asked, then you believe we would have been able to provide enough cryoprecipitate to meet demands. We would have done this by taking on extra staff, and it would have included changes, for example, shift work. Is that right?
I think that's correct, yes.
And how quickly do you think you would have been able to make those changes in order to increase the cryoprecipitate?
Well, bearing in mind that we had the new blood products laboratory built in the early 1980s, we had most of the infrastructure already in place. It would have been a case of taking on more staff, buying more centrifuges, and more equipment for the freezing of the cryoprecipitate. But probably in terms of weeks rather than months, we could have done a significant increase in the production.
You were also asked some questions about what the arrangements were for purchasing and supply and distribution of blood products in the Trent area during your tenure there. And you made it very clear in your witness statement that at no point did the Trent Centre contract with commercial producers for factor products for the area, that the purchasing of commercial products was done by the Haemophilia Centre directors, and they did not want the Trent Centre to do that themselves. Do you have an idea why that was the case? What did you understand to be the reason?
No, I really have no idea as to why they were so resistant to this. As you probably know, in the majority of regions, there was an agreement between the Haemophilia Centre directors and the regional transfusion director that this sort of arrangement could be beneficial, if nothing else, in taking the job off their hands. But the people in Trent were not really interested. They preferred to have everything concerned with their arrangements with commercial suppliers in their own hands. And the money was directly spent through their department, their district health authorities.
You were also, in your witness statement, gave some evidence about the practice at Trent of collecting donations from prisons, and you explained that it was a diminishing practice in the 1970s, and by the time you took over as regional transfusion director in 1974, you brought that practice to an end pretty swiftly. Is that right?
I think that's right, yes.
And why did you do that?
Well, there was most definitely an influence coming across the Atlantic in that the American situation meant that they were targeting prisons quite extensively. because they had, in more ways than one, a captive donor organisation waiting for them, with an added incentive, so we understood, of providing monetary compensation to the prisoners. And there was certainly more indication that cases of post-transfusion hepatitis, which was the major problem in those days, was coming from donations which had been taken in the prisons. So extrapolating this into the English situation, although the prisons were not quite so a hotbed of drug use as they became, we decided that the safest thing by far was to stop taking blood in prisons.
And were you able to replace those sessions easily?
I would use the word deliberately rather than easily. Yes, it was done within our current organizations without any particularly excessive extent of expense, and certainly with existing staff.
And do you recall whether you collected any donations from military institutions during your time at Trent?
We didn't really have any significant military presence within the Trent catchment area. Most of them were outside our geographical remit, so I don't think, from memory, that we had any specific sessions laid on at military establishments. We took blood from serving personnel, obviously, but only in normal, routine donor sessions.
I'm moving on now to AIDS, the issue of AIDS, and I'm going to ask you, first of all, a handful of questions about your knowledge of risk of AIDS. And you tell us in your statement that you became aware of AIDS as a result of the report on 3 people with hemophilia contracting AIDS. Is that right?
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
And for the transcript, and that was used in 1982.
Yes.
In your statement, and for the transcript, the reference for that article is PRSE 3040523. I think you say in your statement that you didn't actually see the CDC report yourself, but you heard about it through word of mouth. Is that
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
And then you also tell us in your statement that you became aware of of a baby who contracted AIDS. Is that right?
Yes.
And again, you didn't see the report itself, but you heard about that through word of mouth.
Yes, indeed.
And the inquiry knows that that was being reported in September 1983. Does that sound right to you? Do you think
That sounds right? Yes, that sounds right.
No, it doesn't. It was reported in 1982 in December.
Sorry, sir.
It was then further reported in the Lancet in April '83. But it was I think the 10th or 12th of December 1982.
Forgive me, sir. So can I have another go at that question, please, Dr. Wagstaff? You've just heard the dates there, December 1982. Are you able to say whether it was around then that you heard about this case?
Yes. Yes.
Did either of the hearing about those cases, did they convince you that the most likely cause of HTLV3 was a virus transmissible by blood?
It seemed the most likely explanation, yes. Yes.
So you were operating on that basis from 1982, and then that was confirmed to you, was it, once the virus was identified, and testing could take place?
Yes, indeed.
Now, can we go, please, to your witness statement, WITN 698001. Sorry, I've got 6988001. One too few eights. WITN 6988001. WITN 6988001. It doesn't seem to be coming up. I wonder whether we can do it without going.
I think, Ms. Scott, if you just read out the paragraph of the statement, if
Yes.
that's the easiest way, I think, of doing it, because we're having difficulty getting the document up.
So, Dr. Wagstaff, you were being asked about discussions with the Haemophilia Centre directors about their use of product and the debate between concentrating.
Can I just pause you there so that I can follow it? Which paragraph number are we talking about?
So it's starting at paragraph 164.
Let me just get there. I have a paper copy. We're there. We can go to page 47.
Page 4. Mine's on page 44, but.
Well, it's on my page 47. I don't know, but it's paragraph 164 anyway. Obviously, mine doesn't correspond with yours, but there we are. So, can we have paragraph 164?
So I can't see that. I don't know whether Dr. Wagstaff.
Just go back a page. Right. Can you see that, Doctor?
No, I'm sorry.
I can't.
No, I can't either.
Okay. Well, let's just go ahead and read it out, Ms. Scott,
Yes.
and ask the question that you have about it.
It's come up now. So you begin the evidence.
Stop. Can you see that, Doctor?
I can now see it, so yes.
Right.
And you're talking. You're telling us there about consultants at the Transfusion Centre meeting with Haemophilia Centre directors to discuss the preferences of the directors, and it all goes back to the question of whether they wanted us to make more cryoprecipitate. And you say we didn't have any influence on their choice, as I have already said, of homegrown as against importing factor VIII. Just pausing there. Generally, was it your view that did you have any influence over the prescribing of the Haemophilia Centre directors? Were you able to influence them one way or the other?
No, not really. I think that they were quite clear in their own preferences and discussed sensibly the question of replacement of factor VIII treatment with cryoprecipitate, but did not really want us to make any extra effort to make more cryoprecipitate. They were quite happy with the choices they had already made.
And two issues arise from that. The first one is do you understand why that was their view? What did you understand to be the reason for that?
I think that on balance, both the Haemophilia Centre directors and their patients felt that at the time, on the evidence that was available, the advantages of treatment with concentrate far outweighed their mainly theoretical disadvantages, and were quite happy to carry on with the kind of treatment they were able to offer, rather than going backwards a step, as it were, to a lesser treatment, in as much as the coverage of current bleeding and a prophylactic approach would be less using cryoprecipitate.
And then you tell us what your response was to that view being expressed by the Haemophilia Centre directors. Over the page, please, page 45. I've got it, paragraph 167. And you say this, it did cause me some discomfort because I think we would have preferred to use more cryoprecipitate, but it was felt by haemophilia centre directors that the benefits of concentrate outweighed the risk. We did use our best endeavours to try and persuade them that we could have been more comfortable with a greater use of cryoprecipitate, or certainly a way of finding less use of American imports.
Yes.
But just wanted to carry on pretty much as they were, especially as the American import was fully licensed for use by the FDA and in the UK.
Yes, indeed, it was.
So just pausing there, you're using the word we. Who are you referring to there?
I think I was referring to the transfusion service as a whole, not just Trent.
And then you talk in paragraph 168 about using your best endeavours to try and persuade them that we would have been more comfortable with a greater use of cryoprecipitate. Can you just tell us a bit more about that? How did you go about that?
This was mainly by face-to-face discussions, presenting them with such figures as were available with regard to the more than theoretical possibility of a transmission of not just the HIV virus, but other viruses as well, by the current product which was available to them.
So your view was it that cryoprecipitate would have been a safer product, and so therefore that was the reason why you were encouraging them to use it?
Cryoprecipitate was a safer product because it was coming from a less potentially infected donor population, and on the basis of the number of donor used in treating any individual patient, there were less numbers involved, since there was no pooling of the product before division into individual doses.
I'm now going to ask you some questions about the AIDS leaflet and the process and your role in drawing that up. Can we pick it up first, please, at CBLA 301707? So we can see here that this is an RTD meeting of the 18th of May 1983. And we can see right at the bottom on the right-hand side of the attendee list is your name. And then if we could go please over to page 3. This is a document we've looked at in previous hearings. At the bottom of page 3, under 10, AIDS, and we can see that Dr. Wolford is there reporting about a DHSS meeting. And then you refer to a letter from Dr. Gunson giving 4 options that RTDs could accept: questioning of donors at sessions to be discontinued in areas of high-risk donors, pamphlets explaining AIDS to donors, and publications in newspapers. And then if we go over the page, please, we can see that you, the first paragraph there, Dr. Wagstaff tabled an example of a pamphlet prepared by Dr. McClelland in Edinburgh, and then the regional transfusion directors discussed the options we've just looked at. So just pausing there, you were tabling a leaflet from Dr. McClelland in Edinburgh. You presumably been in touch with him, had you, about this?
Yes, at that time, Dr. McClelland was one of the leading figures within the transfusion services of the UK with regard to production of the leaflets regarding AIDS. And he was really giving an example of the type of pamphlet which he himself would have preferred for distribution to donors. It followed very closely the lines of the AIDS documents, the AIDS leaflets, which were in fact produced.
So that, can you recall whether that was a leaflet that he was using at the time, or one that you were presenting to discuss?
I don't think that it was actually in use. It was part of the workup for the National AIDS leaflet that hadn't been produced for distribution.
And then going back to the document, the RTDs discussed the options presented above and rejected options 1 and 2. And so just remembering that's questioning of donors at sessions, and sessions to be continued in areas of high risk donors. Can you recall whether that was a unanimous decision?
I think it was more of a consensus decision than unanimous.
And can you remember what your view was about those two options, the questioning and discontinuing of sessions in high risk areas?
I shared the comments that it was not particularly a good thing to put that onto a donor leaflet, since there would be a great deal of discontent about the definition of a high-risk area. So the agreement on that point was fairly unanimous. The question of direct questioning of donors on the AIDS question was more contentious because it was felt by many people, perhaps up to 50% of the regional transfusion directors, that an approach made by really direct questioning about sexual proclivities at a donor session would be disruptive to the session itself and would certainly be a disincentive to donors to come again. It was a question of the loss at that time of donor numbers, which was high in the minds of many RTDs who felt that we couldn't afford to lose donors at a rather high rate, which was a possibility if the questions were not phrased in such a way as to be acceptable to the donors being presented with them in an open forum.
And then we see there that the action is for Dr. Davis and Dr. Barbara to draw up an information leaflet on AIDS and circulate it for comment. And it was hoped that that would be ready for printing in 6 weeks. Can we go then next, please, to NHBT 0096480_013. This is a letter from you to dear colleague, and we can see that it's dated the 7th of June 1983, and we can see that you had had a phone call from Dr. Diana Walford following the discussions on AIDS, which were held at our Cambridge meeting, and that I think is a reference to the meeting we just looked at. Why was it that Diana Walford was contacting you?
I think at that time I was doing one of my 2 sessions as chairman of RTDs.
And then you set out that senior staff at the DHSS are a little perturbed that the low-key approach being recommended by the NPTS is at odds with the more aggressive measures being taken in the United States. And then missing out the next sentence, you say, I gather that the DHSS senior officers would be happier going to ministers after the election with the news that as a minimum pertinent questions would be inserted into the list of diseases to be pursued at sessions by donors. You'll remember this particular subject was discussed at length in Cambridge, and the decision of the meeting as a whole was that it was not really desirable to introduce questions of non-specific symptoms such as weight loss, night sweats and enlarged glands, my recollection is that we thought that reference to the medical officer of every donor who reacted positively to this type of written question would be extremely disruptive at a donor session. However, I've been asked to review this. I've been asked to ask you to review this decision, even though you may think that it should still stand. So that's the first thing that you're asking for information about. And then you then go on to talk about number 2, about how the leaflet is going to be given out. Do we intend to simply have it prominently displayed at the clerking desk so that every donor who displays an interest may take one? Or do we intend to actively hand one to each donor as he or she signs it? And your impression was the department would prefer the latter. And then you asked for feedback in relation to those particular points. And I'm just going to read some references into the transcript. We don't need to go to these, but there, you had a number of responses, including one from Dr. Fraser from Bristol, NHBT 0039762_049. You had one from Dr. Collins from the Northern RTC, NHBT 0101333_008. From Dr. Tovey of Leeds, NHBT 0021382. From Dr. Entwistle, NHBT 0020746, which we looked at when Dr. Entwistle was giving evidence. Can we then turn to your further letter to colleagues in which you summarise the responses that you've had? That's NHBT 0020668. That's not NHBT 0020668. Here we've got a letter from you again, dear colleague, dated the 6th of July 1983, so just about a month later, AIDS leaflet. And you say, I'm enclosing a copy of the final form of the leaflet, which you can see has been altered from the original, only in the manner of presentation, question and answer approach. And then you set out the responses from the RTDs. The majority of RTDs still feel strongly that approach to donors should be at the lowest key possible, and were correspondingly reluctant to either hand the leaflet to every donor at a session or to send it out as part of the call-up material. However, 1 or 2 regions felt that there might be some benefit in the slightly more aggressive approach, and these RTDs may be asked to run a kind of trial in their regions by either posting or handing out the leaflets. Now, just pausing there, you tell us in your witness statement that you did indeed send out leaflets to every donor and hand them out at sessions. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
So were you one of the regional transfusion directors who were in favour of what's been termed the more aggressive approach?
It wasn't particularly a term I liked at the time, but yes, we were in that camp.
And then going back to the letter, there was also a consensus opinion against undue stress at donor sessions on the vague symptoms associated with AIDS. And the general opinion is that we should alter the illness noticed in the most minimum way. And then you set out the most universally accepted alteration, unexplained loss of weight, and are you in good health, or have you needed to see your doctor recently? What were you referring to there when you refer to the illness notice?
Before we had the AIDS leaflet, there was always a leaflet available to donors regarding possible medical reasons why they should not give blood for their own health mainly. in terms of specifying particular illnesses which would make them unsuitable for donors at that time. It did include very general sort of points, as well as mention of specific ailments. And that, I think, was being extended by A and B in the document which we are now seeing. Or that was our suggestion anyway.
So the discussion had been whether, or well, the option had been whether there should be questioning of donors about signs and symptoms of AIDS, and the agreement was to do that.
Yes, we rather thought that to specifically ask about things like enlarged lymph glands would be counterproductive, in as much as it could not be understood by quite a few people, and would in any case be covered by the inclusion of the 2 extra points in the general notice, which was given to all donors even before the inception of the AIDS leaflet.
Can we turn then to the first AIDS leaflet? So sorry, but before we do that, just to get your view on the process of the production of the AIDS leaflet. Excuse me. It seems very much to be the department being in the driving seat in terms of what's on the leaflet. Is that right? That they were running the process and they came to you for your input?
They were taking advice from RTDs, both north and south of the border, accounting for the input from Dr. McClellan. But the final decision as to what went into the leaflet was made by the Expert Advisory Group on AIDS, on EAGA. And they, as I say, were the final arbiters on that point.
The EAGA wasn't in place at the point the first leaflet came into existence, but it was still being run by the department, was it?
It was, yes.
Can we then turn to the first leaflet, which is BPLL 307247? And we've got there, is it right to understand that this is a leaflet that folds up, so AIDS and how it contains blood donors?
Yes,
the front of it.
Yes.
And then if we turn over to page 2, we get the next page recently is the next page, and then has AIDS occurred in the United Kingdom is the third page, is that right?
Yes.
And then who is at risk of AIDS? And so we can see there that there are 3 categories of people set out there. Homosexual men who have many different partners. What did you understand, and what did your team understand that to mean?
At the time, this was really a follow-up of advice which was given to, I think, to Dr. McClellan from his contacts in the United States with regard to the situation which was prevalent there, particularly in San Francisco, that the majority of cases of AIDS which they saw were in fact in homosexual men who had had many different partners. And taking this as the only benchmark we had on that particular point, it was incorporated in the leaflet. And really, it was a statement of just what it says: homosexual men who have many different partners. What we were not able to at that time, obviously, was to specify just how many, the many different partners involved.
And do you know whether do you know whether any of the donors were asking about what that meant, or confused as to whether or not it might apply to them?
From any personal experience I had with regard to feedback from sessions, that particular point was not raised to any degree.
There is a difference between the way in which you put it that Dr. McClelland mentioned to you, which was homosexual men who've had many different partners. If we look at what's in the text, it's in the present tense, who have many different partners, and it might be thought to be looking at a rather different approach to sexual relationships.
Yes, I must accept that point. It is a point which had not occurred to me at the time, I must confess.
So the only issue is what it meant to the reader, really.
Yes,
but you've got you had no feedback as to whether that caused any particular problem, as to whether the difference was between promiscuity or having had a number of relationships.
Not as a standalone item, no.
And then if we look at the second category, we see drug addicts, male and female, using injections. Again, was there any feedback that you had about whether or not, to suggest that there might have been confusion on the part of the donor, of your donors, about whether that applied to them, given that it was using the present tense?
No, I think that that was quite clearly meant and interpreted as being the current use of drugs.
And then the third is, of course, sexual contact of people suffering from AIDS. Can we then look at CBLA 301820? Which is a table from the advisory committee on the first 6 months experience of the AIDS leaflet. And we can see Sheffield is on the third one down, and it says there that you distributed the AIDS leaflet with call-up cards, and the number used was 78,000, and you had nil in stock. Do you recall a period of time where you didn't have any AIDS leaflets to give out?
No. In fact, I think that although it's regarded as stock nil, I think that we were never completely devoid of leaflets.
And then it says in the column donor response effect on attendance. You've said nil. What do you recall about the donor response to the leaflet?
I think in common with virtually all of the other transfusion centres, which you see in the centre column there, the reduction in attendance of particularly called donors didn't happen. There was no particular loss of donors that we could attribute to the use of these leaflets.
And did you have an idea as to whether that was because the concerns that this leaflet would put donors off simply hadn't eventuated? Or did you form a view that it was because these leaflets were not in fact very effective at putting off the high-risk donors?
No, I think that the leaflets did have the effect of putting off high-risk donors, because if memory serves, there was at least some reduction in the incidence of post-transfusion hepatitis when high-risk donors began to self-exclude. But the leaflet seemed to be generally accepted as a logical way forward in view of the massive publicity that was taking place in the public press at that time with regards to AIDS as the new plague.
And then just picking up on that last column, the third column, other comments, can you help us with what it says their usage will be less when all donors have had, not sure what that says, use Dublin leaflet as example for revision. Can you remember what that is referring to?
No.
I think the last word at the end of the second line may be one, might it be? Usage will be less when all donors have had one.
Yes, it will. Yes, I've had one.
So that looks like the bit we're missing. Then it comes to the Dublin leaflet.
Yeah.
So just so we know that a revised AIDS leaflet was underway from April 1984, and the reference for the meeting, we don't need to go to it, where that was decided as CBLA 301835, and wasn't in use until the end of January 1985. Why, in your view, was it, well, did you take the view that a new leaflet was required?
I think we did, yes. By that time, we had more information coming mainly from the San Francisco experience with regard to just what constituted the major high-risk behavior. In particular, if you look at the two leaflets side by side, that vexed question of homosexual men with more than one partner was more or less taken out of the second leaflet and replaced with homosexual men with even just one partner, because it was realized by that time, as I say, from the San Francisco experience, that even though such a man may think that he is in a monogamous relationship, he has no real knowledge, no certifiable knowledge of his partner's behavior. That was, as I say, the information coming from experience in the States that made us change that particular entry in the leaflets.
And we see you having a leading coordinating role for the blood transfusion service in terms of the first leaflet. Did you have a similar role in terms of the second leaflet?
There was a similar coordination, yes. The individual who's responsible at departmental level for the assembly and production of the leaflets was in fact an observer at RTD's meetings and was privy to all of the discussions going on regarding the use and possible revision of the leaflets. So we did have a hand in that.
Is that Dr. Moore?
Yes.
And do you have, can you help us at all with your understanding as to why it took so long? So from April 1985 until the end of January April 1984 to the end of January 1985 for the leaflet to be produced?
No, on that point, I have no idea. As you say, by the first of those dates, the format of the new leaflet was completed as far as we were concerned, and the delay in its actual getting to press was unknown to us.
We heard evidence from Professor Contreras that in North London they got fed up with waiting for the second leaflet, and so started to overprint the first leaflet. So with the criteria for homosexual men that ended up in the second leaflet, as you say, practicing homosexuals.
Right.
Were you aware that was what was going on in North London?
No, I wasn't actually. No.
Did you consider taking any such steps yourself?
No.
And why not?
A fair question, which I find difficult to answer. I think we had got ourselves into the situation of assuming that the leaflet would be available at any minute, and time went by before it actually did happen. But in the meantime, we had not reached the stage of having to take action of our own. I think it has to be borne in mind that the region run by Dr. Contreras was a particular standout region in terms of high risk. They had many more drug addicts in their area, and more homosexual practice. And on account of this, I think it's probably known too that the Regional Transfusion Centre issued what might be called a supplementary leaflet of their own regarding the transmission of AIDS by high-risk behaviour. So I'm not surprised to hear, I must confess for the first time, that they overprinted the first leaflet.
And in relation to that additional leaflet, that additional questionnaire, again, same question, did you know at the time that that's what they were doing?
We knew that they intended to do it, yes.
And did you consider doing something similar yourself?
No, I don't think any other region did, because they acknowledged that that region was a specific and special case.
And I'm just, I'm not going to go to the second and third leaflet. I'm just going to read the transcripts, the references into the transcript. So the second version of the leaflet, as you've identified, the first high risk category being practicing homosexuals, is at NHBT 0096480_022. And then there was a third leaflet in September 1985. Again, we don't need to go to it, but CBLA 302255. Again, in relation to that leaflet, did you perform the same role that you had for the first and second leaflets, sort of coordinating the responses from the RTDs to feed into the department's operations?
The same discussion and feedback took place, yes.
And then thereafter, is it right to understand that there were various discussions about revisions to the AIDS leaflets over the years to come, continuing well into the 1990s? Again, it was the same process. The Department of Health kept control of the AIDS leaflet with input from various different bodies.
Yes.
And I think you said they did that through the EAGA when that...
They did indeed, yes.
How receptive do you consider the Department of Health or the DHSS were to your suggestions about what should be in the AIDS leaflet?
Generally, we found them very receptive. The interface that we had with both Dr. Walford and Dr. Smithers was good on these points, and anything that they took part in discussions at RTD's meeting were regularly taken back to discuss with their colleagues at departmental level. And they were quite religious in feeding back to us the results of their discussions and the agreements which were eventually met for the format of the next leaflet.
Were you aware that, again, at the North London Regional Transfusion Centre, they had a system in operation which allowed donors to indicate partway through the process in a confidential manner that their donation should not be used?
Yes, we always took the stance over the whole of the NBTS that there should be an opportunity for self-exclusion at any point, right up to the actual taking of the donation. I don't think that many people, if any others than North London, had situations whereby people actually self-deferred during the donation itself. But we were aware that it was a possibility and that it had happened on one or two occasions.
And so how in Trent did you try and facilitate that for donors once they'd walked in through the door, read the material, realised that they may be at high risk? Was there a kind of space-saving mechanism by which they could exit the procedure without it being obvious why?
I think the face-saving at that point was that in addition to the AIDS leaflet they had been given, they were also given the pre-existing illness list, which we've already referred to, which they could, if they wished, use as an excuse for not remaining at the donor session. I think very few of them would have said that they couldn't give blood because they belonged to this high-risk group. As I've said, I think in my witness statement, we have a situation whereby the majority of our sessions are conducted in village halls or the like, where it's a fairly close community, and with regular call-up of donors, very often the majority of donors knew each other by coming together at the same time each year to give blood. So the question of allowing discretion was quite an important one, that they could be facilitated in self-exclusion at any point without giving the direct impression that it was because of the new disease.
We're going to move on now to the question of screening for HTLV3. Can we look, please, at DHSC 302349_005. We can see here a letter from you dated 30th of October 1985 to Dr. Smithies from the Department of Health and Social Security. Excuse me. And you say, many thanks for your letter regarding the use of materials in our hospitals which have not been tested for anti-HTLV3. Like most people, we began testing a few days in advance of the date under the guise of staff training. And so for the majority of blood products, there has been no problem. So just pausing there, the date you're referring to there was the date when the national date of HTLV3 screening was rolled out, is it?
Yes, yes.
14th of October 1985. And then you go on to say, I have now put in hand measures to have returned to us any stocks of untested cryo and FFP held in the regional hospitals. Now, again, just pausing there, that would not necessarily have been frozen product, would it? Or was that frozen product?
Those are frozen products, yes.
Frozen, so that would have all been frozen product. I'm afraid that it may well prove impossible to test and reissue these without severe prejudice to their therapeutic value. They will therefore have to be written off. Personally, I think it's a rather unnecessary step, but I can quite understand the position. So what you're saying there is that the frozen products held by hospital banks will be recalled to be retested and reissued if they can, but you doubt that they can. Is that right?
I'm really saying, I'm thinking that they could be retested, but it would be at the expense of the therapeutic value of the final product, due to the fact that they have left the desired storage conditions on being referred to us, returned to us. and the necessary manipulation of the product to allow us to retest them. During all of these processes, the therapeutic value would deteriorate to such an extent that the majority of them would not meet the required standard. And under those circumstances, it was just not worthwhile carrying on. It would be simpler, easier to simply record and discard the returned donations, returned units.
And is that what happened?
That's what happened.
And why do you say, I think it's rather a rather unnecessary step?
It's unnecessary only because we couldn't do any other. And I think that at that time, we were fairly certain that the material which was coming back would be not non-infective, but there was certainly no reason to do other than take the ultimate logical step of disposal.
So is this right, that from a few days before the 14th of October, you wouldn't have released any untested material from the Regional Transfusion Centre?
That's correct. They wouldn't be marked as having been tested, but they were, in fact, tested.
And why would, when you say they wouldn't have been marked as being tested, what do you mean? We
didn't publicise the fact that we were testing the donations at that point.
Oh, for the few days before the 14th of October.
Yes.
I understand. For products that had already found their way into blood banks, frozen products of FFP and cryo that had already found their way into blood banks by the 14th of October, they would have been recalled by a date after the 30th of October and been destroyed.
Yes.
So can you recall how quickly after writing this letter those products were recalled?
As you can see, the letter is dated 30th of October, and I state there that the measures to have them returned have already been put in hand. So it was a fairly quick succession of events.
So there may have been some untested product being used by hospital blood banks, frozen for FFP and cryo, between 14th of October and the 30th of October, but thereafter there shouldn't have been any untested product.
I doubt very much whether any would have been used, because the measures were put in hand immediately on testings on the 14th of October.
And in relation to non-frozen products that were held in blood banks on the 14th of October, so they were already there, were those ever recalled and replaced?
No, they weren't. There was discussion of this point at the RTD's meeting, and it was taken from a practical point of view that the numbers involved would, for the first part, be exceedingly small because of rapid turnover at hospital blood banks. And for the second part, would, in the majority, have already been earmarked for use for particular patients. So the disruption caused by trying to bring back unused and untested labile material would have been very much counterproductive.
And just to take you to one more document before we break for lunch, Dr. Wagstaff, and that's NHBT 001 5108. And we can see this is a letter to all RTDs from Dr. Gunson, 11th of May, 1992. And he says, I have been asked by the Department of Health to contact you with respect to the identification of any possible blood donations which may be implicated in transmitting HIV to patients as a result of blood transfusion. Could you please identify the blood donors that you have found to be confirmed HIV antibody positive since the commencement of testing, and send a list of the donation numbers of the previous donations, if any, from those donors, together with the dates of delivery to the consultant haematologist at the hospital concerned? Some of you may already have this information available from look-back programmes. Department of Health are anxious that no potential beneficiaries are overlooked. And since these extend to spouses and dependent children, even if you are aware that the patient has died subsequently to the transfusion, the data should still be forwarded to the hospital. First of all, were you able to comply with this request by department?
Yes. Sorry, the identification of donors found positive. If they were regular donors or had given before, then we would in fact be able to fairly quickly and easily identify those donations and to identify the fate of the donations, either dispatched to hospitals or to expire.
And were you one of the centres that already had that information available from look-back programmes? In other words, had you already been carrying out that exercise in relation to any donor that you came across that was HIV or HTLV3 positive?
I don't think we were doing that on a regular formal basis. It was a system which was developed with follow-up from hepatitis B testing and then extended now into HIV testing, in that we would inform hospital consultants with regard to the issue to them of the particular donations. But to the best of my recollection, it did not extend beyond that in the form of a formal look-back programme, as we now come to accept the term.
So, if we saw a document earlier which said that Trent had identified 3 HIV positive donors. So, when those were identified, would you have done what's set out in paragraph 2 here, sent a list of the donation numbers,
yes,
the previous donations from those donations, with the data delivery, etc., to the consultant haematologist at the hospital concerned?
We did that, but I think from memory that is more or less where our involvement ended. It was not taken further, as it might do now with a more modern approach to look-back programmes.
And can you recall how many donors in the Trent region were found to be HIV positive?
No, I can't. I've tried to agonise over this, but there were in fact very few.
So I've come to the end of asking questions about AIDS and HIV, and so I wonder if now is a good time to break.
Yes, it is. We'll take a break now, Doctor, and we'll come back at 2:05. So 2:05, please.